the intelligence, ill authenticated as it was, and they again to many more, with joyous exaggeration. They ran to and fro through the city, and broke open the doors of the temples. Night assisted their credulity, and amid the darkness confident assertion was comparatively easy. Nor did Tiberius check the false reports, till by lapse of time they died away. And so the people grieved the more bitterly, as though Germanicus was again lost to them. New honours were devised and decreed, as men were inspired by affection for him or by genius. His name was to be celebrated in the song of the Salii, chairs of state with oaken garlands over them were to be set up in the places assigned to the priesthood of the Augustales, his image in ivory was to head the procession in the games of the circus, no flamen or augur, except from the Julian family, was to be chosen in the room of Germanicus. Triumphal arches were erected at Rome, on the banks of the Rhine, and on Mount Amanus in Syria, with an inscription recording his achievements, and how he had died in the public service. A cenotaph was raised at Antioch, where the body was burnt, a lofty mound at Epidaphne, where he had ended his life. The number of his statues, or of the places in which they were honoured, could not easily be computed. When a golden shield of remarkable size was voted him as a leader among orators, Tiberius declared that he would dedicate to him one of the usual kind, similar to the rest, for in eloquence, he said, there was no distinction of rank, and it was a sufficient glory for him to be classed among ancient writers. The knights called the seats in the theatre known as the Juniors Germanicus's benches, and arranged that their squadrons were to ride in procession behind his effigy on the 15th of July. Many of these honours still remain, some were at once dropped, or became obsolete with time. While men's sorrow was yet fresh, Germanicus's sister Livia, who was married to Drusus, gave birth to twin sons. This, as a rare event, causing joy even in humble homes, so delighted the emperor that he did not refrain from boasting before the senators that to no Roman of the same rank had twin offspring ever before been born. In fact, he would turn to his own glory every incident, however casual. But at such a time even this brought grief to the people, who thought that the increase of Drusus's family still further depressed the house of Germanicus. That same year the profligacy of women was checked by stringent enactments, and it was provided that no woman whose grandfather, father, or husband had been a Roman knight should get money by prostitution. Vistilia, born of a Praetorian family, had actually published her name with this object on the aediles list, according to a recognized custom of our ancestors, who considered it a sufficient punishment on unchaste women to have to profess their shame. Titidius Labeo, Vistilia's husband, was judicially called on to say why, with a wife whose guilt was manifest, he had neglected to inflict the legal penalty. When he pleaded that the 60 days given for deliberation had not yet expired, it was thought sufficient to decide Vistilia's case, and she was banished out of sight to the island of Seriphus. There was a debate, too, about expelling the Egyptian and Jewish worship, and a resolution of the Senate was passed that 4,000 of the freedman class, who were infected with those superstitions and were of military age, should be transported to the island of Sardinia to quell the brigandage of the place, a cheap sacrifice should they die from the pestilential climate. The rest were to quit Italy, unless before a certain day they repudiated their impious rites. Next the emperor brought forward a motion for the election of a Vestal Virgin in the room of Oxia, who for 57 years had presided with the most immaculate virtue over the Vestal worship. he formally thanked Fonteius Agrippa and Domitius Pollio for offering their daughters, and so vying with one another in zeal for the commonwealth. Pollio's daughter was preferred, only because her mother had lived with one and the same husband, while Agrippa had impaired the honour of his house by a divorce. The emperor consoled his daughter, passed over though she was, with a dowry of 1,000,000 sesterces. As the city populace complained of the cruel dearness of corn, he fixed a price for grain to be paid by the purchaser, promising himself to add 2 sesterces on every peck for the traders. But he would not therefore accept the title of Father of the country, which once before too had been offered him, and he sharply rebuked those who called his work divine, and himself Lord. Consequently, speech was restricted and perilous under an emperor who feared freedom, while he hated sycophancy. I find it stated by some writers and senators of the period that a letter from Adgandestrius, chief of the Chatti, was read in the Senate, promising the death of Arminius if poison were sent for the perpetration of the murder, and that the reply was that it was not by secret treachery, but openly and by arms, that the people of Rome avenged themselves on their enemies. A noble answer, by which Tiberius sought to liken himself to those generals of old who had forbidden and even denounced the poisoning of King Pyrrhus. Arminius, meanwhile, when the Romans retired and Maroboduus was expelled, found himself opposed in aiming at the throne by his countrymen's independent spirit. He was assailed by armed force, and while fighting with various success, fell by the treachery of his kinsman. Assuredly he was the deliverer of Germany, one too who had defied Rome, not in her early rise, as other kings and generals, but in the height of her empire's glory, had fought indeed indecisive battles, yet in war remained unconquered. He completed 37 years of life, 12 years of power, and he is still a theme of song among barbarous nations, though to Greek historians, who admire only their own achievements, he is unknown, and to Romans not as famous as he should be, while we extol the past and are indifferent to our own times. End of Book 2. Recording by Graham Redman.